right, I think it's time for another How to Get Into. This is kind of a adjunct to my Worst to Best series where I talk about one band or artist and their entire discography. And instead of like ranking and rating all of their albums from worst to best, this allows me a little bit of a stretching of my legs to talk about their discography and how to get into them. So it kind of does the same thing and allows me to talk about my favorite albums from them, my least favorite albums from them, but in a context to give you, the viewer, kind of a starting map of how to get into their discography. So for those that love the band, this is how I got into them. This is how I would recommend somebody else to get into them, where I kind of rate their albums and how to kind of navigate where I'm feeling for those. And for a newcomer, this is probably the easiest way to find out whether or not this band is for you, if this is a band that you will end up enjoying. So we're coming into one of my all-time favorite bands, and I think for a lot of people, their favorite band. We're talking about Tool today. So Tool, I really don't think needs an introduction. They started off kind of growing out of the grunge metal wave that was going on in the early 90s, but like recontextualizing it in a very proggy way. They had longer stretches of songs. They had a very sophisticated writing style. They weren't using the like very fast approach of that kind of stripped down thrash metal that was going on at the time, but used a lot more sophistication and a lot more, how can I say this without being both pretentious while also overselling the market? They were a little bit more intellectual. Not to say that other bands at the time weren't, but like they were trying different things, utilizing spirituality and talking about society as a whole, and like getting really cerebral within the whole context of it. And they really, they shook the music styles from there, and a lot of bands subsequently have used a lot of those same styles and a lot of those same ideas and aspects that Tool was putting down. So this would be my way of approaching Tool. This is how I would start off with the band, and then from there where you would want to go. The first album, the first one that I would definitely recommend checking out if you haven't already, if you know nothing about Tool, I gotta start with their 2001 release of Lateralis. This album really, really helped me in a very dark time. This is my favorite album from them, so this would be like top tier Tool. That's a fun 3 words to say. But this is one that I love. Like, it's really one that I come back to. I love what they're doing with the music. I also think this is a perfect blending of the two sides of the band. We have that more metal approach that's very raw, it's very heavy, it's got teeth, it's got that edge to it. It's extremely rockin' in that sense, while also being very proggy, very experimental, very atmospheric, very hypnotic, longer stretches of music in that sense. So it's really the best blending of the two worlds from there. From there, you've got 2 roads to go for. Do you want to go for the more raw metal approach, or do you want to go for the more jam session-y, proggy, experimental side of the band? So let's go first for the raw sense. So if you were listening to Lateralis and you're like, man, I'm really digging this metal music, I'm loving the raw presentation, I just wish it had a little bit more teeth to it. I wish it had a little bit more of a bite to it. Then you got to go for the album that preceded it, which is Enema, released in 1996. That's one thing about this album. They take their time of producing an album. 5, 6, almost 20 years can go by without a new release from them. So this was a good, 5 years, 6 years, 7 years between Enema and Lateralis. So Enema is much more raw. It still has a lot more of those spirituality essence towards it, such as tracks with like 46 and 2 and Open My Third Eye, but it's got that teeth. It has that punch to it. It's much more rockin'. It's a lot more raw. I love the big tracks on here like Stinkfist. I already mentioned 46 and 2, and probably my favorite track off of this, the large Goliath, that is Open My Third Eye. But they're also very fun in this sense. They're very tongue-in-cheek. Die in von Satan is this very almost industrial Rammstein kind of a groove that's overlaid with this German speech that turns out to just be a recipe for cookies, but like the way that it's being presented, it's very Nazi-ist, it's very like Third Reich, and then you just realize that it's a recipe for cookies. This also has like such heavy hitting tracks such as Sucker with a Penis and H that people come back to time and time again. But as I mentioned, Open My Third Eye is probably my favorite. And if you were to listen to this on headphones, the 4-minute kind of interlude of Ions has this almost like electrical pulse and plays with binaural beats that really put you into a meditative trance just in time for Open My Third Eye. So they still had quite a bit of intellectual property on this particular album. And if you're liking what you're hearing on this one and you want more raw energy, you want less refinement, a lot more raw, then go to their first full-length LP of Undertow. This one's not necessarily my favorite. This one is more of like a kind of proceed with caution if you're into this style of music. But if you're loving what's on Enema, and as I mentioned, you want that more raw power, then Undertow is a great first endeavor. It's a lot more raw. There's a lot more punch to this one. The tracks are shorter, they're concise, they're punchy. You can tell where the band is going to go in the future with a lot of the laid down frameworks on this. And it still has a lot of that raw energy that the band would do. Like, this album really did take the world by storm in 1993. Grunge was just starting to wind down, and like the new wave of rock material was just starting to ramp up with more of those alternative rock styles. But these guys broke the mold in doing something completely different. And I still love this album. As I mentioned, it's not my favorite of theirs. I come back to this one probably the least amount, but it's still one that I will come back to whenever I want that raw energy. And then from there, again, this is more of a proceed with caution. Their first 2 EPs, the first one being 72826. I mean, if you can find it. Obviously, it's not on any streaming services, but you might be able to find it on YouTube. Same with their bigger EP, their first official one of Opiate. This one I really do enjoy. It's raw. It's not the greatest produced, but you can see where the band is going to go, right? You can see where the band is going to go, some of their ideas, their musical stylings. They're very young, they're very hungry, so that aspect really drives the music forward. You can see that there's still a little bit of refinement that's needed. So if you're into this more aggressive, hard-hitting style of metal, then that's kind of where you would want to go from there. So let's backtrack a little bit. Let's go back to Lateralis. And if you want more of that experimental proggy jam sessions, then you need to follow it up with their follow-up of 10,000 Days. I love this album. Lateralis might be my favorite one. 10,000 Days kind of competes for my second favorite one with another album that I'm going to be talking about in a second. So no spoilers there. They've got a lot more experimentation on this album. There's a lot more jam sessions. There's a lot longer pieces of music. Vicarious opens up the album with a hard-hitting, like, starting point, and it does kind of lay down the foundation for where the album's going to go from there. So if you like Vicarious, you're going to love the follow-up of Jambi, because the two tracks pretty much are flip sides to one another. You have the main chorus, you have this jam session in the middle, and then you have the outro. I love the 1-2 punch of Wings for Marie, and then the title track of 10,000 Days, Wings for Marie Part 2. This jam session really does, like, it's a 1-2 punch. They kind of have this overture with a 6-minute of Wings for Marie, and then just hit you immediately hard. But I also love the bigger hitting tracks of like Le Pan Conjuring, Lost Keys, and Rosetta Stone, like these 3 interludes going on. The overall structure of this album is extremely well done and very well thought out. I don't feel like any of the music at any point gets the same highs as Lateralis did, but I still think like their construction of music in terms of this concept, I really love it. I just do kind of wish that the last couple of tracks, like I love Right Into and Virginity Trez, but they're not the best. So I do feel as though the album does kind of end on a little bit of a whimper rather than a bang, but it still has a lot of those massively proggy, beautiful outlooks that I love. And if you're loving everything that's found on here and you're like, I love this, I love that they're, you know, a little bit less aggressive and a lot more jamming, then you're going to really, really love their latest album and the final piece that I'll be talking about, which is Inoculum. This one is, again, it competes with 10,000 Days, but I think I actually might like this album more. And I recognize the fact that not a lot of people really enjoy this album, and I get it. You know, the tracks are wandering the landscape. They're not as punchy. The big raw aggression that we felt from Undertow and Enema are long gone, but it's the jamming sessions, it's the playouts, it's the wandering the landscape and seeing what works. Like, I feel like this album was made for me because all the tracks on here never take the easy way out. They're always trying something new and developing the tracks. Honestly, my favorite track off of this entire piece is Descending. I love where that track goes, and it really makes me very emotional by the end of it. But I can also understand why a lot of people don't really appreciate or like this album because, yeah, it's a big task. There's a big ask from the audience, and if you're like me and you love this style of music, if you love those drawn out playouts, if you love that jamming session, you love that experimentation of space, you're gonna love this album. But if you find that, and I won't necessarily disagree, some people say that it's just elevator music. It's very generic. There's not a whole lot of innovation on this album, and I can't say that they're wrong, but I also feel like there's a lot of innovation for the music that's being presented. So that's kind of like a caveat. This is a little bit of an approach with caution, but if you're like me, this will be one of your absolute favorite albums. But if you need a little bit more punch, need a little bit more teeth in your music, then that's probably not going to be for you. So again, this will be one that's kind of like an approach with caution. That's kind of my roadmap for Tool. That's kind of how I would investigate. Luckily, they only have put out like 5 full-length albums with a number of EPs. So it's not a whole lot of a task to sit down over a weekend or so and like listen to all their albums and find out which ones you like and which ones you don't like. Spend more time with those that you want, invest the time and really get that payout that you like, and then revisit those that didn't necessarily connect with you at first. Because even I will say, like, Enema and Undertow didn't really connect with me at first. It took a little bit more time to get into, but then once I finally got into them, I'm like, okay, I see what they're going for. I really appreciate and love what they're doing. So that's kind of what I got for Tool. What did you guys think? Where would you start with Tool? What are your favorite albums for Tool? Which ones would you like run for first? Which ones would you approach with caution? Let me know all about that by commenting down below. What other artists do you want me to visit on this? The main reason why I presented this as a how to get into rather than a worst to best is I don't know if Tool's going to be putting out another album. You know, they still have a lot of longevity in their streams, and I mean, we didn't think that we would be getting Inoculum, but here we are. So who knows, in another 20 years we might have another Tool album. But I wanted to present this as a how to get into rather than a worst to best, so that I leave myself open for a worst to best in the future. So that's kind of where I'm at for Tool. Again, what did you guys think? What's your favorite Tool album? What's your least favorite Tool album? Where would you start for a Tool I guess introductory point? Let me know all about that by commenting down below. And if you like what you see and you want to help support me, consider donating to my Patreon. I want to give a huge shout out to my latest patron of David E. Frez. Thank you so much, David. And if you want to be cool like David, head on over to patreon.com/notereviews. I've left the link down below. Yeah, consider donating. Even $1 a month goes a long way. So yeah, that's all I've got. That's all I've got for this little video. Thank you all so much for watching. As always, you guys are definitely the best. And until next time, notes out.